guys, I'm Janet on occasion, and so today we're going to continue talking about the Storm of Chaos, because obviously I didn't have the time in the last episode, and I'm not going to have time to do it in more campaign lore play, so I'm going to have to finish it this way. So where we left off is basically the Empire was sort of torn slightly with what to do with themselves, because they knew that there'd be a bunch of marauders coming from the World's Edge Mountains, as well as Archaon's forces in the north. So the Elect Counts of Stirland and Averland didn't really want to budge. They didn't want to send their army north, only to come back and realise that, their provinces had been sacked. So a bit annoying. But luckily, as we continue the story, respite came in the form of messengers from the dwarf hold of Carrick Cadrin. The Slayer King, Ungrim Ironfist, had vowed to hold Peak Pass against Crom's Horde, or die in the attempt. Although this was no guarantee of security. With this news, the Counts of Stirland and Averland agreed to send some of their forces to join the Grand Alliance. They would remain behind with the rest of their armies and lend assistance to King Ironfist. The two armies were to meet at Talabheim, where the army of Talabheim was mustering, eager to revenge itself for the defeat in the north by Archaon. That would be when they lent their army to Volkmar the Grim, when he was slain by Archaon. Terrible shame that, but yeah, apparently he comes back. I'm not sure how that happens, because it doesn't tell me in this book. Anyway, the army was too great to move wholly by river along the Talabheim, and so the troops of the Reichland and the zealots of Huss's peasant army set off to the east. Remnants of Surtha Lank's horde still hid in the deep forests of Ostland, and reinforced by the second wave of invaders, had crossed the Talabheim in several places, and were raising towns across Talabheim. To ensure the support of the Elector of Talabheim, Karl Franz promised to clear this incursion on the way north. The army fought several skirmishes as it travelled eastwards, driving the forces of chaos before it. Beastmen emerged from the forests to harass the supply caravans and attack isolated camps, and progress was slow. On occasion, the men of the Empire would come across a burning beastman camp, or piles of their bodies pierced with slender arrows of elven design. They never set eyes upon their mysterious allies, though. 10 leagues from Talabheim, the army was attacked in force. Beastmen poured from the woods, sounding their horns to call for their twisted kin to the battle. Arrayed across the road to Talabheim was an outlandish army of Northmen, dressed in patterned furs, with brightly dyed skins and hair, and tall crests on their helms. These worshippers of Slaanesh had crossed the Talabheim south of Talabheim, and awaited the arrival of the Empire force. The battle lasted until sunset, the Chaos Army slipping away under the cover of darkness, back into the forests. The screams of their captives haunted Karl Franz for the next 3 nights, as he pressed on with his army towards Talabheim. Outside the great city-state camped the army of Talabheim. As Karl Franz and Volton rode through the mustered host, a great clamour rose up, as soldiers jumped to their feet, cheering their leader's arrival. Soon thousands were pressing in towards the pair, jostling each other for a sight of the 2 greatest men of the Empire. As the Reichsguard moved forward to clear a path, the army of the Empire suddenly parted in front of the 2 generals. Ahead of them, they were met by one of the strangest sights ever to have been witnessed. The 2 small forces waited uncomfortably for the new arrivals. On the one side stood a contingent of dwarfs, nervously handling their hammers and axes. The cause for their concern was the 500 High Elves in their glittering armour, at their front the High Mage Teclis. With him stood a tall elven steed, its flanks white and glistening, its armour gleaming. Teclis strode forward and waved for Volton to dismount. He presented the young warrior with the steed, telling him that its name was Althandin, sired by Malhandir, steed of Prince Tyrion. Though not purebred like his father, Althandin was finer than any horse of the old world, and Volton accepted the gift with a nod and a smile. Not to be outdone, a venerable dwarf stomped forwards from his folk, 2 of his followers bearing a large suit of armour between them. Its silver and golden plates shimmered with rune magic. The dwarf introduced himself as Barak Grimjaw, temporary ambassador for High King Thorgrim Grudgebearer. It was his honour, he said, to present Volton with a suit of the finest Gromnil armour. Forged 2,500 years ago for Sigmar, the armour had never been claimed. The High King thought it fitting that Volton have it now. and with it came the promise of future friendship and wishes of best luck. Bolton stripped himself his Imperial plate armour right there, and with the aid of the Barak, donned the Gromril suit. Leaping into the saddle of Althandin, the elven steed reared high as Bolton raised the hammer of Sigmar above his head. A rousing cheer shook the camp, joined with elven and dwarfen voices. To Middenheim! So Middenheim then. One other little bit here that I want to read is it's basically just a little blurb on Ulrich. Because obviously, Ulrich, the god of winter, he was the god of Sigmar. He was Sigmar's god when Sigmar was a lad. By lad I mean mortal, I suppose. That's the guy who Archaon is trying to destroy, which seems a bit brazen, but sure. There's a little blurb about him here, which I thought I'd read. So, Ulrich is the fierce warrior god of battle, winter, and wolves. The centre of his worship is the great city of Middenheim, the city of the White Wolf, in the north of the Empire. Ulrich's domain is honour, bravery, and prowess, and he has an intense hatred for cowardice and weakness. His followers are expected to be self-assured and independent, strong, fierce, and honourable in all that they do. Ulrich is one of the oldest of the gods worshipped by men. His worship was well established before Sigmar's name was even known, and it was the High Priest of Ulrich himself who crowned Sigmar the first Emperor. Always striving to live up to their god's high expectations, the Empire soldiers of the northern states are proud and brave warriors who still stand and fight Archaon and his hordes to the last man. So that's good news, right? So you got to remember you might not actually. I think I mentioned it when talking about Middenheim, though, is that it was under siege. Middenheim was under siege before Karl Franz got there. They did have a really bloody siege. But Middenheim, brilliant place. They've got a lot of power. Obviously the Ulrichsburg being this big mountain, with a flat top where the city is. They got the big walls around it as well. It's a tough nut to crack, and especially when that nut is filled with Knights of the White Wolf, Knights Panther, warrior priests of Ulrich. It's gonna be tough. It's gonna be very tough to invade. So Archaon really had his work cut out for him. Even with his hell cannons and all the rest of it. So anyway, here I've got a great little, there's a little bit of, it's set out like a story really, little introduction to the battle. So I'm going to read that. So, smoke from hundreds of campfires coiled skywards, and the Elector Count of Middenheim, Boris Todbringer, could smell the reek of the thousands of base creatures camped around his city as a rank animal stench. A cold wind whistled around the thronged ramparts of the Ulrichsburg, and the Count found himself wishing he had a cloak as thick as that of Emil Valgir, our Ulrich of the God of Winter and Battles, who walked alongside him. "Damn me, but there's a lot of them," said the Count, stopping to warm his hands at a smoking brazier, and nodding respectfully to the soldiers around him. The clanking of a chain thrower further along the wall intruded on his thoughts, as its winders loaded axes with looped lengths of chain attached to their halves into the bizarre machines. The enemy was sure to have beasts that could soar above the plains, and to meet that threat, dwarf engineers had constructed enormous bolt throwers and the axe throwers that would foul the wings of even the largest flying creature. Our Ulrich nodded. "Aye, there's a few of them right enough. But we have the men here to stop them," he said, raising his voice so that the other soldiers around him could hear. "Your warriors have stout hearts, and will hold the walls. Have no fear of that." "I know they will," agreed the Count. "But to see such a horde... You hear the numbers, but it is so vast that you can't comprehend how huge it is until you see it with your own eyes." "But we have the greatest fortress in the old world, my lord," said our Ulrich, his voice, trained to reach the furthest corners of his cathedral, reaching out to the hundreds of men gathered on the stretch of wall. "And no army in the world has taken Middenheim by storm. We will make them pay in blood for every foot of ground they take. And do not forget, my lord, as well as the strength of men, we have Ulrich's thunder." Count Todbringer nodded, leaning out over the parapet to look down at the enormous wolf-mouthed cannon mounted upon the monstrous turntable on the level below. Sweating teams of dray horses strained in their harnesses as they dragged the gargantuan bronze behemoth around into a firing position. The weapon's hulking loader, a giant creature, fully 8 times the height of a tall man, hefted one of the enormous siege gun's iron cannonballs, itself larger than a small cottage. Into the barrel as soot-stained gunners struggled with a multitude of powder kegs. That sounds a little bit over the top, doesn't it? Great wooden ramps were constructed behind the gun to allow it to roll back into position after firing. And Count Todbringer, who had heard the gun's mighty roar, knew to be somewhere else when it fired for fear of losing his hearing for days again. The elect Count of Midden slapped his hand on Valgir's shoulder. "You are correct, Emil. We shall never allow the filth of chaos to set so much as a single foot on the streets of our city, my friend." Ulrich bowed to the Lord of Middenheim, casting his gaze out over the horde of warriors and beasts assembled by Archaon, the self-proclaimed Lord of the End Times. Thousands upon thousands of warriors, beasts and monsters clustered around the rock of the Ulrichsberg, the bray of tribal horns and guttural chants drifting up from below. Brazen idols were raised on spiked platforms, and even high above the forest plain it was possible to smell the stench of blood from these monsters' shrines to the dark gods. The ground surrounding the Ulrichsberg looked like a scarred wound on the earth, the forest having been stripped down by the besiegers to fashion siege engines, fuel campfires, or construct mantlets and barbarous siege towers. Neither the Count nor Ulrich were strangers to war, but the incomprehensible vastness of Archaon's horde defied belief. Thus far, Archaon's force had been content with testing the defences of the lower walls and sending scattered sorties along the great viaducts. Though every such attack had, so far, been repulsed. The wooden bridges that linked the viaducts with the city's 4 main gates had been destroyed. The 3 Midden marshals and the Knight Eternal, each taking responsibility for one of the keeps that defended the gates. Each able-bodied man within the walls had been called to war, and the coffers of the temples in the city had been bled dry recruiting mercenary regiments from all across the old world. Knights Panther and Knights of the White Wolf had put aside their traditional rivalries and stood shoulder to shoulder on the ramparts with the men of Middenheim, and the wizards had gathered their strength to counter the dark magics of Archaon's shamans. Thousands of armoured soldiers lined the walls of Middenheim, their faces tense, though Ulrich was pleased to note the absence of fear. Spear points and halberd blades glittered in the low spring sunlight, and Ulrich was filled with a sense of fierce pride in these brave men of the north. With such soldiers to command, Middenheim could not fall. A mournful horn blew from the horde below, and another answered it. Soon a mad chorus of horn blasts and drum beats were echoing all around the rock of Middenheim, and a ripple of movement began among the encamped horde. A swelling roar built from the thousands of throats, and the clash of axes and swords on iron-bossed shields rang out as Archaon's horde mustered for battle. "And so it begins," said the elect Count of Middenheim, extending his hand to Ulrich. "The battle for the old world has begun," agreed Valgir, accepting his lord's hand. "Ulrich, go with you." So, so pretty cool. Jolly big cannon. Has to be loaded by a giant. That's all good fun. The Ulrich, being a great orator. Just good fun. Good flavour, I think, And, even the knightly orders. They're not bothering to hold petty rivalry anymore. And they got much more important things to be doing. So, it's pretty cool. So, here I should point out that Midland has a big sort of place in the Storm of Chaos. So, if you want to find out more about Midland, go listen to the Midland episodes I did in the campaign lore play. You'll probably, you'll learn a lot more there. Because, I don't really want to repeat myself. There's a lot about Midland in this book, but I'm not going to go over it in this episode, because we've already covered the city and of Middenheim and Midland in pretty exhaustive detail. So I'm not gonna waste your time if you're watching all these in order. So, but I will talk about the soldiers of Midland, the ones that are going to be defending Middenheim from all this nonsense. So, first we have the warriors of Ulrich. So Ulrich is the god of warriors across the old world, and initiates of his cult are expected to make their way in the world by directness, bravery, and force of arms. A good number find their calling in formal alliances and mercenary regiments, yet in the Empire, there are many wandering fighters seeking adventure, fortune, or simply to honour their patron. When Ulrich announces a holy campaign, many of these warriors heed the call, and those that are able to make their way to Midden to take up the cause. They band together in groups of like-minded souls, frequently using a test of arms or other contest to establish a leader amongst them, and a bearer for an agreed icon or standard. So including those, we have the Tutogen Guard. So the Tutogen Guard are the personal bodyguard of Ulrich, as his role as an elector of the Empire, accompanying him both at state occasions and on the battlefield. They are named after the great Tutogen tribe, that in the time of Sigmar helped the man-god drive the orcs and goblins invaders from the lands of men. However, unlike the Great Swords, who are drawn from the state army, the Tutogen Guard are instead selected from the ranks of the Templars of Ulrich, the Knights of the White Wolf. Each year the Tutogen Guard is renewed, with its members selected by the Grand Master and Ulrich himself. They are often members of the Order's inner circle, although the selection process takes account only of merit, not rank, and ordinary brethren are just as likely to be chosen. Being selected for a tour of duty in the Tutogen Guard is one of the highest accolades a Knight of the White Wolf can receive, and the warrior's already fearsome resolve is strengthened still further by the weight of the honour and duty he bears. And we also have the Wolfkin. So the Wolfkin are fighters driven to near madness by hardship or despair. Rather than lower themselves to morose preaching or of punishment for man's sins and the end of the world, however, followers of Ulrich traumatized in this way take a more direct approach, befitting their pragmatic and vengeful god. Gathering together, they travel the roads and forests seeking out beastmen, orcs, and evil in any form. Their anger and hatred lends them insane strength, and they hack apart their foes with a terrible fury, oblivious to the most insurmountable odds, in their desire to destroy those responsible for the ills of the world. Though often sombre and quick to anger, the warriors of the Wolfkin are welcomed in the armies of Midden for their bravery and power more than make up for their impetuousness. Many a raiding force of bandits or beastmen has attacked from the forests, confident of raising a village or town, only to be driven back by the fury of the Wolfkin of Ulrich. And then finally we have the hunting hounds. So the Drakwold forest is vast and treacherous, and many monstrosities such as beastmen, orcs, and minotaurs make their lairs deep within it. These creatures are dangerous and savage, and must be purged from time to time, lest their numbers grow out of control. Finding these lairs is difficult, and so the Middenlanders use packs of hounds to sniff them out and hunt them down. So that's fun, isn't it? So that's basically the Empire bit done. Now we're moving on to War Grimgore. So that's right, Grimgore Ironhide's War. So this should be fun, because, you know, gotta love some Black Orcs, right? So they also get involved in the Storm of Chaos. You know, we haven't seen them in our campaign, but yeah, the dwarves have completely destroyed them, like they always do in Total War at the moment. I hope that gets balanced somehow, because yeah, the Orcs need to be more of a presence, I think. Because yeah, the Empire never really see any of them, apart from, you know, the odd little sort of horde army, you know. But well. So when chaos grows strong, war is inevitable, and it is just as inevitable that others are stirred into action by the coming destruction and mayhem. The Orc warlord Grimgore Ironhide was no exception, perhaps sensing the change in the air, or maybe simply bored with the routine. The Black Orc stopped his regular raids against the Northern Empire and led his tribe further north. Stopping on the way to sack the odd Kislevite town, Grimgore soon found himself in the mountains of southern Norska, on the doorstep of the Skaven stronghold of Hellpit. The Skaven, of the great clan Mulder, did not take kindly to the presence of so many savage warriors, and a war broke out between the Orcs and Skaven. This was much to Grimgore's liking, as he greatly enjoyed the new and bizarrely mutated creatures sent against him by Throt the Unclean. Soon, however, Grimgore's interest began to wane once more, having slaughtered the best and largest creatures that the Master Mutator could create. Grimgore and his boys were faced with pitiful slaves and clan rats. Having lost its fun, Grimgore decided to leave Hellpit alone, to gather its strength. Perhaps he would return in a few years for another go. So, having heard much of the great warriors who lived in the frozen north, Grimgore next decided to test his might against the hardened peoples of the Marauder tribes. The warlord forged his way across the high pass, battling against Kurgan tribes that were making their way to the west, to join up with Archaon's army. From captives taken in these battles, Grimgor learned two things. Firstly, that the world was soon going to get a lot more interesting. This human warlord, Archaon, was going to give the Empire a good kicking. Secondly, another human warlord, who laughingly called himself the Conqueror, was coming to High Pass with an army of immense proportions. Sensing a foe worthy of his attentions, Grimgor dispatched his trusted boys to round up as many orcs and gobos as they could muster, and these reinforcements met up with Grimgor at the foot of the High Pass as it descends into the Darklands. Here, the army of Crom the Conqueror met the horde of Grimgor. The battle lasted from sunrise to sunset, the blood of the two forces staining the snow and mud crimson. Grimgor and Crom hacked their way through the press to face each other, and fought in single combat. Whilst the two battled out their personal rivalry, Crom's army overwhelmed the Greenskins, driving them back to High Pass. Grimgor and Crom traded blows and parries for many hours, neither willing to back down. Eventually, as darkness fell, Crom relented and stood back, allowing Grimgor to see the remnants of his army fleeing to the west. Surrounded on all sides by Chaos tribesmen, Grimgor had to back down. Grimgor had been given a new goal, to redeem himself in the eyes of Gork and reclaim his title as the baddest, meanest, hardest warlord to ever have lived. His army had survived years of constant battling against men, Skaven, other orc tribes, and now the hordes of Chaos. Though not as numerous as they had been, the survivors of Grimgor's exploits were toughened veterans of countless battles. With these Ard boys, as Grimgor started calling them, the warlord returned to the old world to show this Archaon upstart just who was boss. Marching back through Kislev, Grimgor's army slaughtered Chaos worshippers and Kislevites alike, butchering all they came across. With him, his boys dragged the effigy of Gork, and as the panicked news of Grimgor's advance spread, word came to other orc tribes living in the World's Edge Mountains. Realizing that the Empire was now fair game, orcs in the tens of thousands poured down from the mountain lairs, some of them with their own crudely hewn or constructed effigies. Grimgor himself followed the trail of destruction leading to Middenheim, and realizing that Archaon intended to storm the city, decided that his boys needed to get in on the action too. Otherwise, who would ever take them seriously again? With human slaves captured from various tribes and warbands unfortunate enough to mistake Grimgor for an ally, Grimgor constructed two mighty war engines. The Gods, as they were known, were mighty siege towers built in the shape of Gork and Mork. From the belly of Gork protruded a massive battering ram, while Mork was topped with the largest rock lobber any of the orcs had ever seen. Shamans danced atop the huge war machines, while Grimgor's personal rock effigy of Gork pulsed with power. Knowing that the gods wanted him to prove himself, Grimgor joined the assault. So, what the hell, Grimgor? I mean, why didn't you just fight Chaos? Because, you know, they're supposed to be big and hard, you know. Prove yourself against them. But no, Chaos need all the help they can get. Because, you know, Middenheim, it's tough. It's very tough. You know, full of some of the best fighters in the old world. So, what can you do? You know what? I'm going to do demons. I'm going to do demons next. Because, I was right. Chaos does need all the help it can get. And, frankly, it's not just the Chaos Marauders, you know, and Chaos Warriors. No, they've got a lot of help. You know, from demons. So, probably best we talk about them, you know. So, most fell of the creatures of Chaos are the demons, spawned from the nightmares of mortals and given form by the raw chaos that pours from the north. Demons are often only fleetingly attached to the world. Random possession, fleeting visions, and temporary incarnations are enough to make them a plague upon the world. Yet when the realm of chaos yawns wide and magic spills across the land in invisible waves, the threat of the demon becomes terrible. Legions of unnatural beings break through from their otherworldly realm, their dread voices rising up in praise of their masters, the arcane battle cries and unholy screams and bellows turning men insane on simply hearing them. Such was the force brought forth by Be'lakor, also known in recent times as the Dark Master, though he has been known by many names and titles through the centuries and in different lands. First Demon Prince of Chaos, Be'lakor's hubris was turned against him, and Tzeentch cursed him to millennia of insubstantial, maddening existence. Where once Be'lakor thought himself worthy to lead the legions of the gods in their final conquest of the world, now he was damned to crown the mortal champions of the gods, his heart seething with jealousy and betrayal. That curse was lifted upon the crowning of Archaon, and Be'lakor rejoiced in his freedom. A thing of shadow and terror, the Dark Master conjured up a great portal for his ancient armies to march through, accompanied by raucous blaring of horns and guttural shouts of triumph. In the wake of Archaon's advance, Be'lakor drove his legions southwards, towards the lands of men. It was in the cold, frozen lands of Kislev that Be'lakor was drawn to a certain place, and upon arriving recognized it as the battlefield upon which Volkmar the Grim had faced down the Everchosen. Frozen corpses littered the bloodied field, half-eaten by crows and vermin, and in the midst of that deathly immobile scene he spied the ruins of the Grand Theogonist war altar. Its trapping broken, and its images of Sigmar cast into the bloodied, frozen mud. Amongst the ruin of the battle chariot lay the body of Volkmar himself, frozen in his final agonizing death throes, a sparkling gash of blood across his chest, and the broken remains of the jade griffin amulet lying at his feet. Sensing a means to assert his superiority over Archaon, Be'lakor drew forth his most ancient magics, and laid his hand upon the crest of the Grand Theogonist body. Upon the chest of the Grand Theogonist body. Dark energies coursed from the Demon Prince into Volkmar, and with a shuddering scream the Grand Theogonist's soul was dragged back into its body. Pain flaring through him, Volkmar breathed again, and his eyelids fluttered open. Even the faith of the mighty Volkmar was sorely tested as he looked upon the terrifying apparition that stood before him. He could feel the taint of chaos magic seeping through his limbs, his heart, and his mind. Be'lakor had the Theogonist taken up and chained to the battle standard of his legion, from where the agonized cursing and wailing of the priest could be heard, and his writhing body seen. While Archaon had merely slain the leader of the Church of Sigmar, Be'lakor sought to inflict a lifetime of physical and mental torture upon Volkmar. He would see him broken and weeping and pleading for the forgiveness of the gods for his false ways. Already he owed his life to the dark powers of chaos, and it pleased Be'lakor to ponder the tormented thoughts that would plague the priest until his mind was finally broken by it. With his unholy standard marching at the head of the legion, Be'lakor headed south once more, pleased with this small victory over his rival. When Midden fell, he was sure that it would not be at the hand of the upstart Archaon, but by his own mighty deeds. He would become the true champion of the gods and be restored in their favour, as he was destined to be for the last 3,000 years. So that's what happened to Volkmar the Grim. Yeah, he's fine. Yeah, he's just he's a bit tied up at the moment. So what's next? I think it's dwarves next, because that's actually all it is for the Storm of Chaos introduction to the demons. Is they begin existing, which makes sense. That's they don't really do much else apart from that, and it's only from time to time, of course. So one thing I absolutely love with Storm of Chaos actually is it gives Midden a lot of focus, but it also gives Carrick Cadrin a lot of focus as well, because the sort of the main dwarf army involved in this conflict is the Slayers of Carrick Cadrin, which is very cool. So definitely, that needs to change in Total War, right? We've got to have the Slayer King on his throne. Carrick Cadrin needs to be a proper force again. It's so sad that they're not. Seriously, just put Angrim in Carrick Cadrin, okay? Please, for the love of God. Anyway, let's talk about them. But actually, we're going to do that next episode. We're going to start off talking about the dwarfs, and then everything else. And hopefully, I've got about an hour's worth here. So, so 2 episodes out of it, I think, is probably best, because, listening to like an hour of this, it's quite a lot. So, that's what I'm going to do. So if you enjoyed this, please do comment, like, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Have a good day, guys.